He believed her, and this was his fatal weakness. But when a quiet marriage became a battlefield and trust a weapon, will there be room for mercy? Do not spare your nerves. Watch to the end, where all illusions collapse. The smell of burnt coffee clung to the air as I stared at the acceptance letter from the Florence Art Institute. My fingers trembled against the crisp paper. 10 years ago, I'd traded my easel for Ethan's stability, a decision that now felt like a slow-acting poison. The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual, each second a reminder of the lie I'd built. Ethan's mug sat on the counter, navy blue, chipped at the rim, the same one he'd used every morning since his startup collapsed. I used to find that routine comforting. Now it suffocated me. You're quiet tonight. Ethan's voice cut through the silence. He stood in the doorway, tie loosened, eyes scanning me like a spreadsheet. I crumpled the letter into my apron pocket, just tired. I lied. His gaze lingered, sharp and calculating. For a heartbeat, I wondered if he knew. The Parkers invited us to dinner Saturday, he said, pouring coffee into his cursed mug. Their lawyers joining. Good networking. I clenched my fists. Networking. Always networking. Not once had he asked about the paint smudges on my sleeves or the late nights book club. Never explained. I'll pass, I said. His jaw tightened, but he nodded, the same controlled motion he'd used when firing employees. Later, I found Riley at our usual booth in the dim-lit diner. Her wedding band glinted as she stirred artificial creamer into her coffee. "You're really going through with Florence?" she asked, voice low. "I have to," I said, sliding the acceptance letter across the table. "Before I become one of Ethan's investments." Riley's laugh was brittle. Says the woman who married him to escape her parents. The truth stung. I'd traded one cage for another. As I left, my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Duval, the gallery owner I'd met at the exhibit. "Your portfolio's raw. Let's discuss Friday. 8 p.m. The Loft." I deleted it, but not before memorizing the address. The attic fan whirred like a trapped insect as I dragged the box of old canvases into the dim light. Dust motes swirled in the beam from the single bare bulb, settling on half-finished landscapes and portraits of strangers I'd once painted for cash. My hands shook as I unrolled the Florence application, still unsigned. The deadline glared at me in red ink, but the real deadline was Ethan. He'd be home in 3 hours, his routine as precise as the stock market ticker he watched nightly. Beneath the canvases, I found the mason jar of dried acrylics. Crimson flakes clung to the glass like old blood. I'd hidden it here after our 3rd anniversary, when Ethan joked that my hobby was cluttering the guest room. Now, I dipped a brush into water, watching the pigments swirl, a tiny rebellion in a murky glass. Downstairs, Ethan's study door clicked shut. Through the vent, I caught fragments of his call. "Prenup clause, emotional distress, yes, Friday." His voice was calm, surgical. The same tone he'd used to negotiate layoffs. My stomach tightened. The Parkers' dinner wasn't about networking. It was a staged alibi. I crept to his desk later, finding spreadsheets between tax files. Line items glared. Gallery visits, 6. Late returns, 12. Unknown contacts, 3. He'd been tracking me. A sticky note listed Marcus's name beside the Loft and 8 p.m. My pulse thrummed. Ethan hadn't confronted me because he didn't need to. He was building a case, brick by brick. Friday night, I stood outside the Loft, my portfolio case damp against my palms. The gallery windows glowed, alive with abstract sculptures that seemed to twist in judgment. Inside, Marcus leaned against a marble column, his laughter blending with the clink of champagne flutes. He waved me over, but my feet froze. In my pocket, the torn corner of the Florence letter brushed my fingertips. Signing it meant burning the life I built. Not signing meant suffocating in Ethan's spreadsheet existence. Across the room, Marcus raised a glass. To me or to the art? I'd never know. As I turned to leave, a flash blinded me. A man in a black hoodie lowered his camera, melting into the crowd. By the time I reached home, the photo was already online. Ethan sat at the kitchen island, his mug steaming. "Harper," he said, tapping his phone screen. "We need to talk about priorities." The hardwood floor creaked under my slippers as I paced the living room at 3 a.m., Ethan's mug glaring at me from the sink. His absence felt deliberate, a chess move, not an accident. The photo from the loft had gone viral in our small circle, captioned "Local Artist's Midnight Muse." Comments praised my bold reinvention, unaware the man in the blurry background was Marcus, not a lover but a curator. Ethan's silence was worse than anger. He'd left a single sticky note on the fridge, "Dress formal for court Monday." In his study, I found the folder. Legal documents sandwiched between our wedding photos, motion for asset freeze, emotional abandonment affidavit. My hands trembled at the highlighted clause, spousal negligence due to obsessive artistic pursuits. He'd even included receipts from my secret art supply runs. The dates stretched back to our 5th anniversary, when I bought cobalt blue paint to drown the numbness. The park bench where Ethan first proposed was slick with morning dew. I clutched the unsigned Florence application, its edges frayed from sleepless nights. Marcus arrived in a charcoal suit, his gaze scanning the empty jogging trails. "You're risking a lot," he said, sliding an envelope across the bench. Inside, a contract for a solo exhibition titled Unseen. My throat tightened. The feature piece? A half-finished portrait of Ethan's hands, steady, lifeless, gripping his mug. "Sign by tonight," Marcus murmured, "or the slot goes to someone hungrier." He left without shaking hands. I stared at the signature line, imagining Ethan's smirk if he found this. But the real trap wasn't his, it was mine. I painted myself into a corner, every brushstroke a confession. Rain blurred the windshield as I parked outside the courthouse. Ethan leaned against his Audi, chatting with a sharp-faced woman, Lila Carter, his lawyer. My stomach dropped. Lila had been my roommate at Pratt, the one I'd copied for that doomed final project. Her laugh carried across the lot, venomous and familiar. Inside, the judge reviewed Ethan's evidence. The photo, the contract, even my abandoned canvases labeled hoarding. Lila argued I prioritized fantasy over partnership, citing Marcus's exhibition as proof of infidelity. Ethan stared ahead, a statue of wounded dignity. When the gavel struck, granting him temporary ownership of the house, I didn't fight. Let him win the walls. The real theft was quieter. He'd already taken my voice. That night, I smashed the mason jar of dried paints. Crimson dust pooled on the floor like a warning. In the shards, I saw Ethan's reflection sipping coffee from his unchipped mug. The motel's neon sign buzzed like a dying wasp, its pink glow bleeding through threadbare curtains. Boxes of half-finished canvases crowded the floor, their corners warped from the rain-soaked drive here. Ethan's house, my house, now belonged to a judge's signature. But the real loss was the studio nook under the attic window, where morning light used to dance across my brushes. Here, the air smelled of mildew and regret. I found the envelope slipped under the door at dawn. No postmark, just my name scrawled in Ethan's precise handwriting. Inside, a grainy photo of Marcus and me at the loft, circled in red. Beneath it, a loan agreement dated 6 months prior. Ethan had mortgaged the house to fund a silent partnership in Marcus's gallery. My lungs tightened. The collateral wasn't bricks and wood. It was my art, my escape, reduced to line items in his ledger. The community center's art class smelled of turpentine and defeat. Teenagers splashed acrylics onto discount canvases while I demonstrated blending techniques, my hands moving on autopilot. After class, a girl lingered, Mira, her name tag peeling. She held up a sketch of fractured glass. "It's how my parents sound," she said. For the first time in months, I felt seen. That night, I painted her portrait in jagged strokes, the glass shards morphing into wings. At 2 a.m., a knock shattered the silence. Marcus stood in the hallway, his coat damp. "The exhibition's canceled," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Ethan's lawyers threatened the gallery. But there's another way." He slid a flyer across the table. Underground Art Collective, no names, no rules. The date, the same as the final court hearing. The warehouse district loomed under a moonless sky, its alleys echoing with distant sirens. I carried the wrapped canvas like a shield, Myra's sketch tucked in my pocket. Inside, flickering LEDs illuminated graffiti-tagged walls. Artists huddled in corners, their faces masked. No one asked for names. As I hung the fractured glass portrait, a flashbulb exploded. The same hooded photographer from the loft lowered his camera, grinning. Panic surged. This wasn't a collective. It was a honey trap. Outside, Ethan's Audi idled at the curb, Lila tapping her briefcase against the passenger door. "You never learn," she called. The canvas slipped from my hands, glass shards scattering like broken promises. By morning, the motel room was empty. Even Myra's sketch was gone, replaced by a single sticky note. "You lose what you can't protect." The motel's air conditioner rattled like a tired breath as I sifted through the debris of my art. Broken frames, torn sketches, and the lingering scent of turpentine haunted the cramped space. Beneath a collapsed box, I found Myra's glass-winged portrait. Untouched, its edges curled but defiant. Her teenage scrawl on the back read, "Fly anyway." The words cut deeper than Ethan's legal blades. I traced the cracks in the glass, each fissure mapping the lies I'd swallowed. The final hearing loomed in 48 hours, but the courtroom wasn't where this would end. My fingers closed around a charcoal stick, its dust staining my palm like a promise. If Ethan wanted to weaponize my art, I'd turn his ledger into my canvas. The abandoned textile mill echoed, with ghosts of industry, its rusted looms silent witnesses. I worked under a single dangling bulb projecting Ethan's spreadsheets onto the walls. Loan agreements, surveillance logs, and Lila's smirk from the courthouse steps merged into a collage of control. Over them, I layered Myra's wings in cobalt and gold, a rebellion in pigment. Marcus found me at dawn, his silhouette framed in the broken doorway. He didn't apologize for the trap. Instead, he slid a burner phone across the floor. "They're watching your accounts," he said. "But this they can't track." The screen displayed an encrypted forum, art as evidence. My throat tightened. He left without waiting for gratitude. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters, their cameras hungry for scandal. I carried no briefcase, only a rolled canvas. Inside, Ethan sat flanked by Lila, his navy tie knotted with military precision. The judge frowned as I approached the stand, unrolling my exhibit. The projection lit the room. Ethan's spreadsheets dissolved into Myra's wings, then into time-stamped photos of his meetings with Lila long before the loft. The gallery contract's fine print morphed into our wedding vows, each forever, underlined in red. The room buzzed, but I stared only at Ethan. His mask slipped, a flicker of panic quickly buried. Lila objected, citing emotional manipulation, but the judge's pause was a lifetime. In that silence, I glimpsed the truth. This wasn't about winning. It was about etching the rot into the record, ensuring it couldn't be scrubbed. The gavel fell in Ethan's favor, but the gallery links spread faster than the verdict. That night, my motel door creaked open. No thugs, no threats. Just Mira clutching a new sketch. She said nothing. Didn't need to. The motel's walls absorbed the echoes of the verdict like a tomb. Myra's sketch lay on the bedside table, her glass wings now smudged under my restless fingertips. Ethan's victory was a hollow crown. He'd won the house, the gallery, even the narrative. But the encrypted forum buzzed with strangers dissecting my courtroom exhibit. "Is this real?" asked user ArtVulture87. "Who's the guy in the tie?" demanded TruthSeeker404. Their questions were sparks in the dark, but sparks could ignite. I traced the motel's floral wallpaper, its pattern repeating like Ethan's lies. In the parking lot, a black sedan idled. Not lawyers this time, journalists. Their lenses pressed against the window, hungry for the deranged artist angle. I drew the blinds and unrolled the last intact canvas. A self-portrait in fractured mirrors, each shard reflecting a version of me Ethan had erased. The textile mill's ruins glowed under a half-moon. I'd returned to burn what remained. Canvases, sketches, even Myra's wings, all fed the oil drum's hungry flames. Smoke curled into hieroglyphs of regret. But as the fire waned, a glint emerged. Ethan's old ledger, charred but legible. Page 47 detailed payments to Lila dated before our marriage. My knees buckled. He'd hired her to craft the prenup long before I'd signed it. The ultimate insurance policy. Footsteps crunched behind me. Marcus stood at the edge of the light, a USB drive dangling from his fingers. "From the gallery's backup server," he said. "Emails. Contracts. The works." He tossed it into the drum. Flames licked the plastic, but I lunged, searing my palm. The drive survived, its contents a grenade. Marcus smirked. "Art's not your weapon. Truth is." Ethan's gated community slept under a blanket of false security. I scaled the back fence, the USB drive burning in my pocket. His study glowed, a lone beacon. Inside, his mug sat empty, the first crack splitting its rim. I plugged the drive into his laptop, watching his screen flood with emails. Ensure Harper's dependency. Gaslighting effective. Terminate Marcus's gallery lease. A floorboard creaked. Ethan stood in the doorway, silk robe askew. For a heartbeat, we mirrored each other, two predators in a broken home. Then his screen flickered, the emails projecting onto the wall behind him. His reflection trembled. I left the drive impaled on his mug, its contents auto-syncing to the forum. The sedan followed me to the motel, but this time, the journalists weren't alone. Mira stood among them, her sketchbook open to a new page, a phoenix rising from ledger ashes. She didn't smile. Didn't need to. Rain lashed the motel window, distorting the headlines on my laptop screen. Tech mogul's secrets exposed. Art or revenge? The encrypted forum had metastasized. Anonymous users dissected Ethan's emails, stitching together timelines of financial coercion. ArtVulture87 posted a meme. Ethan's face photoshopped onto Munch's screen. TruthSeeker404 leaked Lila's law firm invoices, sparking a hashtag, #WhoIsHarper hashtag. My portrait of Myra's wings trended beside selfies of strangers holding fly anyway signs. The power dynamic had flipped, but victory tasted like ash. Ethan's Audi idled outside for hours, windshield wipers scraping time. When he finally left, a single rose lay on his windshield, a white bloom already browning at the edges. His mansion loomed under a bruised sky, windows dark except for the study. I circled the property, crunching gravel under boots. Inside, shadows moved, Ethan pacing, phone pressed to his ear. His reflection fractured in the rain-streaked glass, a cubist nightmare. The back door yielded to a code I still remembered, our anniversary date. The house smelled of bleach and desperation. His mug sat shattered in the sink, porcelain shards glinting like teeth. Upstairs, his closet gaped empty save for a single navy tie knotted around a hanger. On his desk, a printed forum thread. Ethan Clark, sociopath or genius? Red ink circled both. I left no note. Just Myra's phoenix sketch tucked into his desk drawer, its edges singed from the mill fire. The river swallowed my art supplies one by one. Brushes, palettes, even the USB drive, all sank into the silt. The current carried Ethan's mug downstream, its handle catching moonlight like a farewell wave. Mira found me knee-deep in the water, her sneakers abandoned on the bank. She didn't speak, just waded in, clutching a sealed jar of fresh acrylics. We watched the last canvas, a half-finished portrait of Ethan's hands, bob and vanish. When she pressed the jar into my palm, her fingers left smudges of cobalt and gold. At dawn, the motel room was empty. Even the floral wallpaper seemed muted, its patterns blurred by humidity. On the nightstand, a new sketch, the river, its surface fractured into 1,000 wings. The community center's walls bloomed with Myra's murals, glass shards morphing into feathers, fractured faces pieced into wings. Strangers moved through the space, their hands brushing the art as if seeking communion. I lingered in the doorway, hood pulled low. A teenage boy pointed to my courtroom exhibit, now printed and pasted beside a quote, "Art outlives prisons." His friend snapped a photo, the flash slicing through my anonymity. I fled to the riverbank, its currents whispering secrets I'd tried to drown. The USB drive's ghost haunted my palm. Not guilt, but the weight of unintended consequences. Ethan's empire had crumbled, his LinkedIn profile replaced by a Wikipedia page titled The Clark Scandal. But the forum's hunger turned cannibalistic. TruthSeeker404 doxed Lila, ArtVulture87 auctioned my burned sketches. Justice, it seemed, had no off-ramp. Ethan's mansion stood boarded and graffitied, its gates pried open. Inside, the walls bore scars of looters, shattered frames, spray-painted slurs. His study, once a vault of control, reeked of mildew and urine. The desk drawer hung crooked, Myra's phoenix sketch gone. In the cracked hallway mirror, our reflections overlapped, his ghost in my hollow cheeks, my rage in his absent eyes. I smashed the glass, shards biting my knuckles. Beneath the debris, a floorboard creaked. A fireproof safe held our wedding album, its pages defaced with red ink. I knew. I always knew. The final photo, us laughing at the park, was slashed diagonally, his face severed from mine. The motel's neon sign died mid-buzz, plunging the room into silence. I packed Myra's jar of acrylics and the boy's photo of the mural. At the threshold, I hesitated, then unpinned the courtroom portrait from the wall. Its edges curled like ash. The Greyhound station hummed with midnight travelers. A girl with Myra's eyes offered me a sketch, a bus morphing into a wing. I traded her the portrait. As the engine growled, my phone lit up. Marcus's final text. "Gallery's yours if you want it." I let the battery die. Through the grimy window, the city shrank into a mosaic of light and shadow. Somewhere, Ethan's mug rolled in the river. Somewhere, Myra's wings took root. The road ahead held no masterpieces, only the hum of tires on asphalt, a blank canvas in motion. The bus wheels hummed a lullaby as the horizon swallowed the city's skyline. Fields blurred into streaks of green and gold, the road a suture stitching old wounds. Myra's jar of acrylics warmed my lap, its pigments settling into sediment, earth tones for landscapes I'd never paint. At a rest stop, I traded the driver a sketch for a coffee, bitter and scalding. The cup trembled in my hands, steam curling like the ghosts of brushstrokes. By dusk, the river reappeared, wider here, its currents gentler. I followed it upstream to a forgotten footbridge, its planks sagging under the weight of decades. Below, a sandbar glowed in the fading light, littered with driftwood and beer cans. I knelt, tracing a wing into the silt. The river licked at its edges, dissolving the lines. Art as ephemeral as truth. The motel's neon flickered to life as I entered the next town, a different number, same floral decay. The clerk handed me a key and a folded flyer. Community Art Night. All mediums welcome. The address was a barn on the outskirts, its doors splintered but open. Inside, farmers and teens huddled around a bonfire, passing charcoals and laughing. No forms, no cameras, just smoke and shared silence. I unrolled Myra's river sketch on a hay bale. A woman with calloused hands offered me a chisel. "For the woodblock," she said, nodding to a stack of reclaimed planks. I carved wings into the grain, splinters embedding under my nails. When the firelight hit the relief, shadows danced like phoenixes. No one asked my name. Morning fog veiled the highway as I boarded another bus. The driver nodded to Myra's jar, now cradling a fresh bloom, a dandelion plucked from the barn's cracks. I pressed it between the flyer and the woodblock, its seeds clinging to the grooves. Somewhere behind me, Ethan's Wikipedia page updated. Lila's firm dissolved. Marcus's gallery burned in a headline. Electrical fire destroys controversial space. The forum's chatter faded into white noise. The road unwound, endless and indifferent. I closed my eyes, the dandelion's ghost imprinting my lids, a fleeting sun. Art, I realized, wasn't a weapon or a shield. It was the act of leaving marks, knowing the river would take them. And sometimes the marks left you first. Every ending is just the beginning of another story waiting to happen. Don't stop now. Click to discover more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.